Millionaire sees black girl identical to daughter he lost crying at station. His attitude changed everything. David Chun left the top floor of Chen International Hotels in Chicago with a heart as heavy as concrete. At 38, he had built a hotel empire worth $850 million, but all his wealth could not erase the pain he had been carrying for 2 years. The October rain lashed the streets with fury, perfectly mirroring the emotional chaos he felt whenever he remembered Emma, his 6-year-old daughter who had died in a car accident on a sunny afternoon that had changed his life forever. He dismissed his driver and decided to walk to Union Station to catch the train home. He preferred the anonymous crowd to the suffocating silence of his empty apartment. As he crossed the station's main hall, crowded with people rushing to catch night trains, something made him stop abruptly in the middle of the frenetic movement. A black girl of about 6 was sitting alone on a bench near the ticket windows, crying silently as she clutched a worn doll. Her curly hair was wet from the rain, and her simple clothes, a faded pink dress and worn-out sneakers, revealed a precarious financial situation. But it wasn't poverty that shocked David to the core. It was her face. Her large, expressive eyes, the delicate shape of her cheeks, the way she tilted her head when she cried, everything was devastatingly identical to Emma. It was as if his deceased daughter had been resurrected with darker skin, but with the same soul he would recognize anywhere in the universe. David felt his legs go weak. For 2 years he had avoided any contact with children, crossed the street when he saw playgrounds, refused invitations to places where there were families. Seeing that girl was like looking through a window in time to moments that would never return. "Why are you crying?" he asked, kneeling beside the bench, his voice choked with emotion. The girl looked up, her eyes exactly like Emma's when she had nightmares, and whispered, "My mom went to look for work. She told me to wait here, but it's dark and she's not coming back." The innocence in her voice, the natural trust with which she spoke to a stranger, the way she held her doll the way Emma held her teddy bear, it all awakened paternal instincts that David had buried along with his daughter. "What's your name?" he asked, taking off his expensive coat and gently placing it over the child's wet shoulders. "Zoe," she replied, snuggling into the warmth of the Italian wool. "Mommy said it would be quick, but the people who interview take a long time to decide." There was a premature wisdom in those words that broke David's heart. Children shouldn't know words like interview, or have to wait alone in busy stations. "I'll stay here with you until your mom gets back," David said impulsively, sitting down next to her on the cold bench. It was the first time in 2 years that he had made a decision based on pure emotion rather than business logic. "I'm in no hurry to get home." Zoe smiled, the same smile Emma used to give him when he promised to read her an extra story before bed. "Thank you, sir. Mom always tells me not to talk to strangers, but you have kind eyes." Emma had eyes like that too. David felt a chill. "Emma. She was my best friend in the hospital. She died, but she said she would send an angel to watch over me when I needed it." David's world stopped. How could a 6-year-old talk about death so naturally? And why did she specifically mention the name Emma? There were secrets in this child that he didn't understand, impossible connections that defied any rational explanation. At that moment, watching Zoe snuggle into his coat while telling him about a dead friend with the same name as his daughter, David felt something he hadn't felt in 2 years: purpose. He didn't know it yet, but that encounter at the rainy station was about to change not only his night, but his definition of family, love, and second chances. If you're feeling the same emotion that took over that bench at Union Station, where an impossible encounter was about to heal broken hearts, be sure to subscribe to the channel and help monetize this content, because stories that transform lives deserve to be shared with the world. An hour later, a black woman in her 30s appeared running through the station, her desperate eyes scanning every bench until she found Zoe. Kenya Williams was soaked from the rain, her nurse's uniform still damp beneath her thin coat, carrying a folder of resumes that clearly hadn't resulted in a job. "Zoe. Oh my God, I'm so sorry, baby." "The interview took much longer than expected," she said, pulling her daughter into a protective hug. That's when she noticed David sitting next to her, and her maternal expression instantly turned to defensive suspicion. "Who are you? Why are you with my daughter?" David stood up slowly, keeping a respectful distance. "I'm David. I found Zoe crying alone and offered to stay with her until you got back." She was wet and cold. Kenya examined the man in front of her, expensive suit, confident posture, but genuinely concerned eyes. Years of working in hospital emergencies had sharpened her ability to read people quickly. "Mommy, he's nice. He gave me his coat and stayed with me when I was scared, Zoe interjected, still wrapped in wool worth more than Kenya's monthly income. The nurse noticed the quality of the fabric, the Italian shoes, the discreet but clearly expensive watch. This man belonged to a world completely different from theirs. Thank you for taking care of her, Kenya said cautiously, but we can manage on our own from now on. There was wounded pride in her voice, the kind of dignity that comes from constantly fighting to keep your head up in difficult circumstances. David recognized that tone. It wasn't arrogance, it was survival. Did the interview not go well? David asked gently, noticing how Kenya clutched the wet folder. She hesitated, then sighed, University of Chicago Hospital. They said my qualifications are excellent, but budget cuts eliminated the position. The cruel irony was that Kenya had been one of the best pediatric nurses in Chicago before hospital cutbacks forced her into unemployment 6 months ago. David felt a familiar tightness in his stomach. University of Chicago Hospital. The same place where Emma had spent her last days, where dedicated nurses like Kenya had cared for his daughter with a love and professionalism that no amount of money could buy. What kind of nursing? He asked, suspecting the answer. Pediatrics. I worked in the pediatric ICU for 5 years until... Kenya stopped abruptly, realizing she was sharing personal information with a stranger. But there was something in that man's eyes that made her feel safe, a familiar sadness she recognized in parents who had lost children. My daughter spent time in the pediatric ICU, David said softly. 2 years ago. The nurses were angels during the most difficult time of our lives. He didn't mention that Emma had died, but Kenya sensed the unspoken pain in his voice. She had lost enough patience to recognize parental grief. Zoe, sensing the emotional tension, took David and Kenya's hands simultaneously. You both look sad. Emma always said that when people are sad together, they're less alone. The innocent observation created an unexpected bridge between two worlds that rarely touched. You mentioned Emma earlier, David said to Zoe, his heart racing. What was she like? Zoe smiled with the sweet nostalgia of children. She had hair just like mine, but straight. And she was super brave during injections. She said her dad was the coolest man in the world, that he built beautiful houses for people to live in. Kenya turned pale. She remembered Emma Chun, the 6-year-old girl who had fought bravely against leukemia for 3 months in the ICU. Kenya had been one of her primary nurses, had comforted that child during painful procedures, had held her hand in moments of fear. And she remembered the devastated father who never left her bedside, who thanked her for every little bit of care as if it were a miracle. You're David Chun, Kenya whispered, the pieces falling into place like a painful puzzle. Emma talked about you all the time. She said you made hotels like castles for happy people. The confirmation hit David like a revelation. This woman had cared for Emma. She had been one of the last people to touch his daughter with professional tenderness. You took care of her, David said. Not a question but an acknowledgement laden with gratitude and pain. Emma always talked about the nice nurses who made her laugh even when she was in pain. Kenya felt hot tears run down her face. She was special. We all loved her. She was brave and sweet, always concerned about not bothering anyone. At that moment, in the noisy Chicago station, 3 lives were connected through the memory of a girl who had touched them both deeply. David looked at Zoe, who looked physically like Emma but carried Kenya's quiet strength, and understood that the universe had conspired to put people who needed healing in each other's path. Can I invite you to dinner? David asked impulsively. Not out of charity, but because I feel like Emma would have wanted us to meet. Kenya hesitated, then looked at Zoe holding the hands of the 2 adults as if they were family, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel completely alone in the world. 3 weeks after their meeting at the station, something extraordinary was happening. David had used his business connections to get her hired immediately as a supervisor in the pediatric ICU, a position that not only valued her experience but offered a decent salary and full benefits. What Kenya didn't know was that David had secretly donated $2 million to the hospital specifically to create a program to assist needy families with hospitalized children. The program included not only free medical care, but psychological support, food, and lodging for parents who needed to stay close to their children during prolonged treatments. Mom is so much happier now, Zoe remarked during one of the weekly dinners that had become a tradition. David had insisted on taking them to modest family restaurants, not to show off his wealth, but to create a comfortable environment where they could talk genuinely. She sings in the shower again, like she did before we lost our home. David felt a deep satisfaction watching Kenya flourish in her new job. She had moved into a two-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood, Zoe was enrolled in an excellent school, and for the first time in months, they both slept peacefully knowing that their future was secure. What impressed David most was how dedicated Kenya was to her work. She arrived early, stayed late when necessary, and treated each patient as if they were her own family. Other employees commented on the miracle nurse in the pediatric ICU, how children responded positively to her genuine affection. "There's a new family at the hospital," Kenya said over dinner at a pizza place Zoe had chosen. A 4-year-old boy with severe pneumonia. His parents lost their jobs and have nowhere to stay. They're sleeping in their car in the hospital parking lot. Her voice carried a concern that David recognized well. Kenya couldn't separate her work from her personal compassion. "The assistance program the hospital recently set up should cover cases like that," David suggested carefully, knowing he was talking about his own donation. "Free lodging for families, help with food and transportation. You could refer them to the social services department." Kenya smiled with genuine relief. "That program is amazing. I don't know what angel investor decided to donate to create it, but it's saving entire families. Before, I saw parents falling apart emotionally because they couldn't afford a hotel and food while their children were fighting for their lives." David looked away, feigning excessive interest in Zoe's pizza. Keeping his identity as a donor a secret was becoming increasingly difficult, especially when he saw the direct impact of his contribution on the lives Kenya touched every day. "You know what impresses me the most?" Kenya continued, unaware of the connection. "Whoever made this donation specified that the program should prioritize children with leukemia and their families. It's as if they knew exactly what kind of support these families need." She paused, remembering Emma. "It's almost as if they've been through the experience themselves." David felt his heart race dangerously. Kenya was getting too close to the truth, and he wasn't ready to reveal his identity as the beneficiary. He had fallen in love with the naturalness of their encounters, the way Kenya treated him like David, the man who had taken care of Zoe on a difficult night, not David Chun, the billionaire who could solve any problem with money. "Maybe whoever donated lost someone special," David said softly, "and wanted to make sure other families had the support he would have liked to have had." Kenya nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense. Pain has a strange way of teaching us empathy." That night, after dropping Kenya and Zoe off at home, a ritual that had become a natural part of his routine, David sat in his car watching the lights in the apartment where they were getting Zoe ready for bed. Through the window, he could see Kenya helping her daughter with her homework at the kitchen table, both of them laughing at some inside joke. It was the first time in 2 years that David had felt genuine joy watching a child. Zoe had awakened paternal instincts he thought he had buried with Emma, and Kenya had shown him that it was possible to love again without betraying the memory of those he had lost. But there was something growing in his chest that frightened him. He was falling in love not only with an extraordinary woman, but with the possibility of the family they represented. What David didn't realize was that Kenya was also struggling with complicated feelings. She had noticed how he watched Zoe with paternal tenderness, how his voice softened when he talked about Emma, how he seemed genuinely interested in their little victories and everyday challenges. For the first time since Zoe was born, Kenya was considering the possibility of not facing life alone. But there was a shadow of mistrust that she couldn't completely shake. Rich men didn't take an interest in hard-working nurses for no reason. And the coincidence of her being hired at the hospital shortly after meeting David seemed too specific to be a coincidence. Kenya had survived by being cautious, and something in her maternal intuition warned her that David was hiding important secrets about who he really was. 2 months later, the discovery came unexpectedly. Kenya was organizing medical files when she came across a folder with documents from the program that assisted needy families. Curious about the administrative details that allowed her to do her daily work, she opened the file and found copies of donation contracts. Donor name, David Chun. Company, Chen International Hotels. Amount, $2 million. Date of donation, exactly 1 week after their meeting at the station. Kenya felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. David Chun. The hotel billionaire she had seen in business magazines and news reports about the country's youngest entrepreneurs. The man who had eaten pizza with her and Zoe as if he were an ordinary person, who had listened to her concerns about families in need, who had lied about who he really was. That evening when David arrived to pick them up for dinner, a Tuesday tradition that Zoe looked forward to eagerly, Kenya waited for him at the door with a folder in her hand. "We need to talk," he said, his voice colder than David had ever heard it. "Kenya, what's wrong?" David asked, immediately noticing the change in his demeanor. Zoe came running to hug him as she always did, but Kenya gently intercepted her. "Zoe, go finish your homework. The adults need to talk." When they were alone in the small apartment that David's donations had made possible, Kenya threw the briefcase on the coffee table. David Chun. Chin International Hotels. $2 million donated exactly 1 week after he met us. His voice trembled with anger and disappointment. "Who are you really?" David closed his eyes, knowing this moment would eventually come. "Kenya, I can explain. You can explain how you lied to me for 2 months? How you pretended to be an ordinary person while manipulating my entire life." Tears streamed down her face, but it was anger that dominated her voice. "I never lied about my feelings," David said desperately. "Everything I felt for you was real. Yes, I'm David Chun, yes, I have money, but when I'm with you, I'm just the man who met a special girl in a rainy season. You turned me into a charity project." Kenya exploded. "My job, our house, Zoe's school, it was all you buying our gratitude. I thought you liked me for who I am, not out of pity for our situation." "It wasn't pity," David replied, his own emotions overflowing. "It was love. I fell in love with you, with Zoe's strength, with the family you showed me was still possible. The money was just my clumsy way of trying to protect you." Kenya shook her head, wiping away tears. "You don't understand. I've spent my entire life proving that I can take care of my daughter on my own. That I don't need some rich man to save me. And to find out that everything, absolutely everything, in my life has gotten better because you decided we were worthy of pity." "Kenya, please listen." David tried to get closer, but she backed away. "When Emma died, I died with her. For 2 years, I lived like a ghost, working obsessively so I wouldn't feel the pain. Until that night at the station, when I saw Zoe crying, and it was like Emma had come back to show me there was still love in the world." "Don't use my daughter to justify your lies," Kenya said firmly. "Zoe has grown attached to you. She calls you Uncle David to her friends at school. And finding out that you're a billionaire who's been playing with us is going to break her heart." David felt genuine panic. "I never wanted to hurt Zoe. She means everything to me now. You too mean everything to me." His voice broke. "Kenya, I know I've made mistakes, but what I feel for you is the first real thing I've experienced since I lost Emma." "Then why did you lie?" Kenya asked, her anger giving way to deep pain. "Why didn't you trust me enough to be honest? Do you think I would have rejected you because you have money?" David swallowed hard. "Because everyone knows me as David Chin first, person second. Because when people know who I am, they change. They become different, calculating, self-serving. With you, I was just David. The man you met that night. But that man didn't really exist," Kenya said, grabbing her car keys. "He was a character you created. And I fell in love with a lie." The confession escaped before she could stop herself, revealing that her feelings were as deep as his. "Kenya, wait," David began, but she was already calling Zoe. "Come on, baby. We need to go." Zoe appeared confused, looking between the two adults who had clearly been fighting. "Isn't Uncle David having dinner with us tonight?" "No, sweetie. Uncle David has other plans." Kenya avoided looking at David as she guided Zoe out. At the door, she turned one last time. "Thank you for everything you've done for us. But I can't keep pretending this is real when it was built on lies." The door closed, and David was left alone in the apartment he had helped her get, surrounded by the echo of laughter that had filled his life with purpose for the past 2 months. For the second time in 2 years, he felt like he had lost a daughter. But this time, the loss also included the only woman who had managed to heal his broken heart. 3 weeks passed in complete silence. David returned to his empty routine, obsessive work, a silent apartment, avoiding any place that might remind him of Kenya and Zoe. But this time it was different. Before the season, he had grown accustomed to loneliness. Now, every moment alone echoed with memories of laughter during dinners, conversations about Kenya's day at work, and Zoe explaining drawings she had made for Uncle David. On Wednesday night, he couldn't take it anymore. He went to Chicago Children's Memorial Hospital, not to look for Kenya, but to watch from afar the program he had created in action. Through the windows of the family area, he saw parents sleeping in comfortable chairs instead of on the floor, children playing in an appropriate recreational area, families sharing free nutritious meals. Mr. Chun. A familiar voice made him turn around. Dr. Patricia Williams, the hospital director, approached him with a warm smile. What a surprise to see you here in person. I wanted to thank you again for the transformative donation. The program is literally saving families. How is it going? David asked, keeping his tone professional to hide his emotion. Is it meeting the expected goals? Dr. Williams nodded enthusiastically. Far beyond expectations. In fact, we have a supervisor in the pediatric ICU who has been instrumental to its success. Kenya Williams. She connects families to the program with extraordinary sensitivity. David's heart raced when he heard the name. Is she here today? She's finishing her night shift. Ms. Williams works tirelessly, especially with difficult cases. Yesterday she managed to get the family of a child with leukemia to agree to stay in the program after they had been sleeping in their car for weeks. At that moment, Kenya appeared in the hallway, still wearing her hospital uniform, carrying a folder with reports. When she saw David talking to Dr. Williams, she stopped abruptly. Their eyes met through the glass, and David saw not anger, but deep sadness that mirrored his own. Dr. Williams, sensing unexplained tension, muttered an apology and discreetly walked away. Kenya approached slowly, her posture professional but her eyes revealing vulnerability. What are you doing here, David? I came to see how the program was going, he replied honestly. And I hoped to see you. Kenya sighed wearily. Zoe asks about you every day. She doesn't understand why Uncle David stopped visiting us. How do I explain to a 6-year-old that we found out you're not who we thought you were? Because I'm exactly who you thought I was, David said softly. Money doesn't change who I am inside. It doesn't change that I fell in love with an extraordinary nurse who cares for children as if they were her own. It doesn't change that Zoe. Awakened paternal instincts I thought I had lost forever. Kenya looked down, struggling with her emotions. David, it's not about the money. It's about trust. How can we build a real relationship when it started with omissions? She paused. But I've also discovered something about myself these past few weeks. I've discovered that we need you in our lives in ways I didn't expect. Kenya, David began, but she raised her hand. Let me finish. Zoe isn't the only one who asks about you. I miss you too. I miss the conversations, the laughter, the way you look at her like she's precious. And that scares me. Why does it scare you? Because it means I've fallen in love with you too. With the man I met, not the billionaire. And I'm afraid those two people can't coexist. David approached her carefully. Kenya, the man you met is who I am when I'm with you. The billionaire is a mask I wear to survive in the business world. But with you, I'm just David, the man who lost his daughter and found a family again. What if we try again? Kenya asked hesitantly. No lies, no omissions. Just the truth, even when it's hard. David smiled for the first time in weeks. No lies. And Kenya? I want you to know that I would be honored to be part of your family, not as a savior or a donor, but as a man who loves you unconditionally. 2 hours later, the three of them were sitting in the apartment that David had helped them get, but which Kenya now knew she could pay for with her own salary. Zoe was nestled between them on the couch, finally sleeping peacefully after weeks of asking when Uncle David was coming back. She loves you, Kenya whispered, stroking Zoe's hair. And so do I. But we need to build this the right way this time. David kissed Kenya's forehead softly. We have time. All the time in the world to build something real. A year later, in the same Union Station where it all began, David was kneeling before Kenya while Zoe held a box with a ring inside. You two have taught me that family isn't about blood or money. It's about choosing to love every day, even when it's hard. So, Kenya Williams, will you be my family forever? Kenya looked at the man she had found through pain, who had learned to love beyond class and color differences, who had become a father to Zoe without ever trying to replace anyone. Yes, she whispered, as Zoe clapped and passengers at the station stopped to watch the most beautiful marriage proposal they had ever witnessed. Forever, yes. The story of David, Kenya, And Zoe proves that true love is born when we see beyond appearances and choose to build bridges instead of walls. When we prioritize authenticity over convenience, we discover that the best relationships are those that transform us into better versions of ourselves. If this journey of love, loss, and new beginnings touched your heart deeply, subscribe to the channel and help monetize content that celebrates second chances and chosen families. Share this story with someone who needs to believe that it is possible to love again after great loss, because sometimes the love we seek finds us in the most unexpected moments.